I'm reading Luke 8:26 to 39. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven out by demons into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this to the town and the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demon had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him.
Thank you very much, Jess, for reading. That was really helpful. And let me just add my welcome this morning. I'm Pete. I'm one of the congregation here. And happy Mother's Day to all of you mums, but also just to all of the aunties, people who are surrogate mums. I know for our family in church, it feels like we have a whole family of mums, sisters, aunties, and so happy Mother's Day to all of you guys. Girls, sorry. You know, collective guys, anyway. So, as we begin, like today, in 2024, in the culture that's around us in the UK, demon possession is not something that often crosses people's minds, is it? Probably, for a lot of us here, it doesn't often cross our minds. We live in quite a materialist world, one that's quite sceptical of things that you can't see or touch or measure with science. And even if we as Christians believe in the supernatural, that there are things that we can't see, that God exists, that there are angels and demons, how often would you attribute something that happens to the work of a demon? It just generally isn't the way that we think. And so when we read a story like the one we've just read in Luke, it can seem a little bit weird. And it's hard for us to kind of work out, well, what does that actually mean for me at work this week? What does it mean in my life? Or maybe we're a little bit skeptical of it. Maybe you were sitting there listening to that story and thinking, did that really happen? Was Luke maybe misunderstanding some sort of illness? Well, there's a famous quote that says, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist." And I think we kind of see the truth of that in our society. But actually, I know that's not everyone's culture here this morning. And maybe the reality is actually it's British culture that's a little bit weird. When you look around the world, if you've travelled much or seen programs about other parts of the world, most of the world is much more aware of the spiritual realm. They accept that actually it affects our lives day to day. That God and the devil can change things. And actually, I was chatting with Yemi this week, who's a member of the congregation, who's from Nigeria. And he was just sharing, just in our sort of, I don't know, we chatted for about 45 minutes, an hour. He could think of two people who he knew personally who had an encounter with someone who was demon-possessed, who had prayed for them. In fact, he was kind of saying the church in Nigeria is almost the opposite to the UK culture, in that the first assumption is that something will have a spiritual cause. And maybe sometimes he was saying they can be a bit slow to kind of think about, well, what might be the physical cause of what's going on in this person's life or in my life? Well, actually, the Bible is quite matter of fact about this, isn't it? Just as we were reading it. It's quite matter of fact about the idea that the material world that we can see and touch is not all there is. There's more to life than that. If we have the next slide. Now, I think, next one after that, sorry. I think when the team travel to Nepal next month, they're going to see this in Nepal. I've definitely felt that, living in Asia for a while. One day, actually, we were visiting a temple in the city that we lived, and I think it was the most oppressive experience of darkness that I've felt. The temple was up this little back street, and as we were walking down towards it, looking on our phones to check that we were in the right place, because it really didn't seem like there was going to be a temple at the end of the street, we passed this sort of mound of rubble and rubbish, and a man kind of came out from it, and he was shouting at us and screaming, and he was pretty wild-looking. And I was holding on to my son's hand, he was probably about 3 or 4 at the time, and I was praying like mad. And then we got to the temple, and on the surface, it appeared really serene. It had these beautiful gardens that you see in Asia, all manicured, every stone was in its right place. And in the middle, there was this paved area with this big copper pot for burning incense and offerings. And all around it, there were the black marks from the soot. And I remember standing there, and it almost felt like there was a hand sort of pressing down on you. That the air was thicker, somehow heavy with malice. I tell you, in that place, the story that we've read this morning did not feel so distant. Well, this morning, we're going to be touching on some pretty big questions. We've already started just by thinking about, are the things that we can't see and touch a spiritual realm? That's one of them. But it also raises questions around the problem of evil, around God's sovereign will and his control over the world, over evil. Those are just a couple. And I know actually those topics, what we're looking at today, it might raise some personal questions as well. Maybe some painful ones, maybe some difficult ones. Maybe things that we're really wrestling with. Things that maybe cause us to doubt sometimes. Now, I'm going to be honest, I certainly can't do these big questions justice. Definitely not in one talk, but I'm not even sure if you gave me a whole series of talks, I'd be able to do them justice. However, if it does raise questions like these, or these are questions that you're really wrestling with, please come at the end. Find Matthew or Lucas. Or me. I just thought I'd throw the rugby ball to them. Yeah. We'll do our best to kind of help you. We might not have all the answers, but as a church, we want to be a place where it's all right to ask questions. It's all right to be thinking these things through. And as a church family, we want to be helping each other to wrestle with some of these difficult topics and really think them through together. Well, this story from Jesus' life, it doesn't answer all of our questions around evil. If we have the next slide. But it does show us two things really clearly. The first is that Jesus, the friend of sinners, has complete control and victory over evil. And the second is that Jesus, the judge, has come in mercy. So those are the two things that we're going to be kind of focusing on today. Now, if we go on to the next slide, this story is in the middle of three stories, all about Jesus' power. The one just before it shows his power over nature. He's calming the storm. Actually, the last song we sung sort of referenced that. The one that we're looking at this morning, it focuses on Jesus' power over evil as he casts out these demons from the man. And next week, we're going to be looking at Jesus' power over sickness and even death. And actually, these three stories taken together, they're really persuasive evidence of who Jesus is. Actually, at the end of the story of the calming of the storm, I'm just going to read the last verse of it. In fear and amazement, the disciples asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." That question of who is Jesus? Who can tell a furious storm to stop, and it does? Who can command demons? Whose touch, in fact, actually just touching his clothing, can heal someone? And whose voice can raise a dead girl, just like I might wake my kids up in the morning? Well, who is he? Well, his actions show that he has power that only God has. Now, move on to our next slide. Jesus has been traveling to different towns and regions around the eastern shore of Lake Galilee, which is kind of up the little blue dot up in the sort of top of the map. And he's been on the Jewish side of the lake. And he's been teaching in little towns and villages as he goes. And now he's crossed over with his disciples to the other side of the lake, to the western shore, to a non-Jewish area. And as he steps out of the boat, we read that he's confronted by demonic powers. The scene of the battle is set, if you like, on the shores of this lake. And as Luke tells us the story, he really captures the tension of this clash. On the one side, we have this poor demon-possessed man. As Jess so helpfully sort of read about him, he's wild, isn't he? He's feral. He's not wearing any clothes. He's living out among the graves. Mark, as he tells us his story, mentions that he had cuts all over his body from the rocks. He must have been a scary sight. I sort of picture him in my mind, covered in dust, mud, his hair all matted. And he comes shouting at Jesus, screaming at him. Luke also tells us that he's unnaturally strong. The demons within him seem to give him an ability to break chains and shackles. It's clear, actually, that the people in the area, they've tried to help him, to control the demons that are within him, to protect him, and I guess themselves as well. But they failed. The demons are too powerful for them. And then almost to kind of emphasize it further, what Jesus is facing, Luke tells us that the man is called Legion because he has many demons in him. Now, a legion is actually another battle term. It's taken from the Roman army. At the time of Jesus, I was reading, a legion was a unit in the army that had 6,000 frontline soldiers and then another 6,000 supporting them. All in all, it's a terrifying picture, isn't it, of the effect of being under the devil's control, of the destructive force that evil can wreak and wreak on someone's life, of the power of darkness and of the devil. And as this battle is being set up, on the other side, we have Jesus. Just Jesus. One man. Now, we know actually from the story before that the disciples were with him in the boat. They're there. But I wonder if you noticed, as we had it read out, maybe as you look down through it, they're not mentioned at all in this story. It's almost as if Luke just focuses on Jesus by himself. And so the scene is set for the conflict. And yet, actually, I wonder if you noticed as it was being read, it's hardly a battle, is it? Imagine if this was a boxing match. You can picture the commentator there, and he says, "The bell has just rung. The fight's begun. The two contestants." Wait a minute. What's happening? I've never seen anything like this. One of them's just got down on his knees, and he's begging for mercy. No one's even thrown a punch yet. What's going on? You see, that's what this story's like. The outcome is never in doubt. It's actually clear from the first thing that the demons say to Jesus that he's the one in control. They come shouting, but they say, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." Jesus is the one who has the victory. This fearsome evil power, this army of the devil, comes shouting at Jesus. But he's begging him. You see, the demons, they recognize who Jesus is. And they're terrified. And even when Jesus asks the man's name, and we find out that actually it's not just one demon, it's this whole legion, the very next sentence, again, he's begging Jesus. 3 times in the story, the demons beg Jesus. You see, throughout this encounter, Jesus is the one at the wheel. He's the one in control. Now, we might have questions. Why didn't Jesus cast them out straight away? Why are they allowed to beg him? Why does he let them go into the pigs? And we're going to come back to some of those questions in the second point. But actually, even with those, it's really clear Jesus is always the one who has the upper hand, who has the power. Actually, his control over these evil spirits is absolute. They must obey him. They can only do what he says. The outcome, if you like, is never in doubt. If we have our next slide. Sometimes I think we can think about the world a bit like a superhero movie. There's a kind of cosmic battle going on, and you don't really know who's going to win until right at the end. We look at our lives and the situations we're facing, and we think, is God going to be able to win through in this? Will he be able to defeat the devil and sort this out? I hope so, but it just doesn't quite feel like that. But Jesus shows us that's not the case at all. The cosmic battle's finished before it even started. God is in control. The devil is under his power, and God's victory is certain. There's no doubt about it. And that's actually how the Bible always talks about Satan. He can only do things by the permission of God. And that should be a real comfort for us this morning. Whatever we're facing, whatever evil you're experiencing, God is still in control. He will keep you through it and ultimately rescue you from it. And maybe you think, well, that's all well and good for you to say, Pete. You don't know my situation. You don't know what it's like in my family, the hold that addiction has over my family member. Or you might be thinking, you don't know what it's like for me at work, the way that colleague just seems to have it in for me. You don't know what it's like to have moved to this country and to not fit in and not know what's going on. You don't know what it's like to have depression. The thoughts that come into my head and grip me and suck me down. And you're right. I don't know what that's like. But look again at the man in this story and his situation. How terrible it was. What a disaster the devil had made of his life. And Jesus was able to bring him out of it, to restore him. And he knows your situation, and he can bring you through it too. Now, I want to be really clear at this point. I'm not saying that these things are necessarily caused directly by demon possession. Please don't hear that. If you're struggling with addiction or mental illness today, that's not what I'm saying. However, like we said at the start, the Bible is clear the devil is real, and he prowls around us like a roaring lion. We're told that in the book of 1 Peter, looking for ways to attack us. And so whatever the tool is that he uses, the truth that we're seeing this morning is still the same. Jesus has complete power over evil. Don't be afraid. However helpless you feel, he can rescue. He can restore. And actually, I've just been, as I was singing this morning, I was just had on my mind something that I read in my Bible reading this morning, just from a little bit further in Luke, where the apostles, it's in Luke 17, the apostles say to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you." I don't know, I just really felt that might be for someone here this morning, something that they needed to hear. But actually, this also raises questions again, doesn't it? If Jesus has this power, why doesn't he stop my situation now? Why doesn't God end evil once and for all? And actually, as we looked at the story, you see that the people in the region, they had their questions about Jesus as well, didn't they? They had their doubts. When they hear about what Jesus has done, they're scared. You see, Jesus' power is awesome, but it's also terrifying. No doubt they had been scared of the demon-possessed man. But what about the one who even the demons were scared of? You see, they hear about Jesus' complete power and victory over evil, and maybe because of what happened to the pigs, they're scared about what Jesus might do to them, what him being there means for them. You see, Jesus' complete power over evil is not necessarily good news for us, without our second point this morning. Jesus, the judge, has come in mercy. Let me repeat that. Jesus, the judge, has come in mercy. And I think there are three ways that we see this in this passage. I think the first is a bit more obvious, and the second two are slightly surprising. So we're going to go through those. Firstly, Jesus' mercy is demonstrated towards the demon-possessed man. And that's kind of been the theme of our sermon series, has been different people who met Jesus. Well, before meeting Jesus, this man's life was a living hell. He was completely trapped by evil forces. Demons ruled his life. They were even able to control his movement and his speech. And Jesus uses his power to mercifully free him. And Luke wants us to see just how deeply Jesus changes him. He describes two contrasting pictures of the man, at the start and then at the end. And it's even more amazing than the most extreme ultimate makeover program that you might see on TV. You see, the man's transformed inside and out. Think about him outside. Before meeting Jesus, what was he like? He was wild, naked, filthy, driven to solitary places, living amongst the tombs. And at the end of the story, after Jesus casts out this legion of demons, he's sitting there dressed. I always wondered, did one of the disciples have a spare pair of clothes for him? And he's sitting with Jesus, isn't he? Calm, attentive. Well, what about inside him? I can't even imagine what it would feel like to be inhabited by an army of demons. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I want to. Or how sweet it must have felt to be in his right mind again. Have we lost the mic? No, there it's back. Yeah. For the voices in his head to have gone. To have control over his body again. And that's how Luke describes him, isn't it? In his right mind. More than that, sitting calmly at Jesus' feet, listening to him, learning from him. The change was remarkable. And it's what Jesus said he'd come to do. In our first sermon in this series, Pastor Matthew looked at Jesus' mission statement, his manifesto, if you like. And Jesus quoted from the prophet Isaiah. If we have the next slide, I think the words should be there. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Well, here we see him practicing what he preaches, doing what he said he was coming to do. This man, who was a prisoner in his own body, who was oppressed by all of these demons, is set free. He's showing him mercy. So the first one, as I said, is obvious. Jesus has mercy on this man. But the second one is a bit more surprising. Jesus even shows mercy to the demons. Now notice exactly why the demons are scared of Jesus. In verse 28, they're frightened that Jesus is going to torment them, that he's going to punish them for their evil. In verse 31, they beg him not to order them into the abyss. Now that word, abyss, it's used in Revelation 20. It's the place where the devil and his demons are imprisoned, awaiting God's judgment. You see, the demons see Jesus and they are terrified. Why? Well, because they're expecting judgment. And we were left scratching our heads. Why does Jesus not imprison them now? Why does he let them go into the pigs? I think the point is that Jesus has not come in judgment this time, but in mercy. And again, I want to be clear, Jesus will come in judgment one day. Actually, Revelations that I just spoke about, Revelations 20, tells us what that day is going to be like. You can look at it for yourself later. There will be a day when all evil will be punished, when full and final justice will be done. And the Bible is clear that Jesus is the one who will be the righteous, fair judge on that day. But that's not why God left heaven, why his son stepped down into creation and became a human. No, Jesus, who will be our judge, came first in mercy. And we even see that with the demons. And the third way we see him showing his mercy is to the people in the region. We already mentioned in their fear of his power, they asked him to leave. And actually, when you stop and think about that, that's quite shocking. The person who has just shown incredible power and mercy to their friend, their family member, someone they would have known growing up, they're scared of him and they ask him to go. And Jesus does. He respects their choice. And I think there's something slightly scary in that as well. But he could have shook the dust off his feet as he got back into the boat and said, oh, it was a mistake coming over to this side of the lake, to the people who aren't Jews. But he doesn't, does he? Actually, he loves them. He doesn't want to leave them in their fear and unbelief. And so he asks the man who's been demon-possessed to stay and tell them all that God has done for him. And actually, on a first reading, I wonder if you felt this when Jess was reading it. It can seem like Jesus has been a bit unkind to the man, isn't it? When he says that he can't come with him. I'm sure there's nothing that man wanted more than to follow Jesus, the one who had just rescued him. But actually, what Jesus is doing is being merciful to the many people living in that region. Again, we see Jesus' heart, his heart of mercy. And actually, that also helps us begin to answer some of the questions we were asking earlier. Why doesn't God stop all evil now if he has the power? Why does Jesus not judge it all right now? Why does he let it continue? Well, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he was a Russian author. He spent many years in the gulags. He was in prison there for what he said about some of the communist leaders. And in one of his books, he has this line. He says, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts." You see, he was also a Christian. And actually, what he is expressing there, we see in the people of this region. You see, evil is not just out there, it's in here as well. These people, they saw the mercy of Jesus and they asked him to leave. Now, if God had chosen that time to judge the world, where would that have left them? And actually, if God acted now to end all evil, to bring the full force of his justice against all evil, where would that leave us? You see, his judgment is perfect. It would include the evil in our hearts, all the ways that we mistreat the world that he's made, all the ways that we hurt each other, for all the ways that we reject Jesus and don't listen to him, just like those people did. And so what Jesus shows us here is amazing news. Now is the time for mercy. Jesus came into the world to mercifully rescue it. And that's great news for us. Because before we became Christian, the Bible describes us all as being in the kingdom of the devil. Paul puts it like this in Colossians 1, chapter 1. Hopefully that'll come up as well in a minute. He says, "Giving joyful thanks to the Father who's qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son that he loves, in whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins." You see, we need mercy and freedom, just like that man did. The dividing line between good and evil, if you like, runs through our hearts, through my heart. We need Jesus to forgive our sin, to buy us out of the slavery that we were in to the devil and to sin. And so this morning, it's the best news ever that Jesus, who will come back one day as judge, came first in mercy. And I hope being reminded of that this morning helps you to give joyful thanks like it did to Paul. But actually we see in this story that God doesn't want his mercy to stop with us. Jesus gave the man a job to tell everyone about how God had shown him mercy. And if you're a Christian sitting here this morning, then we also have a story of how God has shown us mercy, don't we? How he is still showing us mercy each day. We might not think it's as dramatic as the demon-possessed man, but it's powerful. And God still wants us to tell our families, our friends, our colleagues about how God is showing us mercy, how he has shown us mercy, and the difference that that's made, so that they can discover his mercy is for them and is open for them. now, while it is the time of mercy. Well, I hope you've seen this morning that although the man's encounter with Jesus, it might seem a bit weird to our culture. It might feel weird to us. Actually, God has a lot to say to us through it, doesn't he? And actually, it really helps us as we live in the world today, between Jesus' first coming 2,000 years ago in the Middle East and his return at some point in the future. It helps us as we live in a world that's messed up, that's broken, that's being oppressed by evil in all sorts of ways. It shows us that Jesus, the friend of sinners, has complete control and victory over evil. There's no doubt about that. And that's a huge comfort to us. Whatever we face in the future, whatever we're going through now, whatever is in our past, God isn't caught off guard by it. He's not surprised. He allows it only for a purpose and will carry us through it. He will bring us safely to the other side. And Jesus, the one who will come again as judge, came first in mercy. He's come to rescue us from evil. We might not know what we're facing at the moment, whether it's the result of the devil and his demons or human evil, maybe a mix of both of them. But Jesus has come to save us from both. He has power over both. Jesus has the power, and he has come to save. And like this man, if we've accepted Jesus' mercy, then Jesus wants us to tell everyone about it and not be quiet. Well, that's not always easy, so let's pray as we finish. Father God, I'm so thankful that you know the situation of all of us in this room, of everyone watching at home online. You know the evil that we're facing. You know those who are feeling trapped by situations that just feel outside of their control. Thank you, Jesus, that we've seen this morning. They're not out of your control. And please would you help us to see again, to realize more deeply that you have power over evil and that you're merciful. And so, Lord, just help us to keep looking to you. Help us to keep clinging on to you. Help us in our fear to trust you, because only you can bring us through. And thank you that you promise one day you will bring an end to all evil. But thank you so much that you have shown us mercy now, and that your arms and your heart is open in mercy towards our world and towards us. And Lord, if there are people here this morning or watching online who haven't yet accepted your mercy to them, please, Father, I ask that you would speak into their hearts this morning, that you would show them how much you care for them, how you are ready to show them mercy, whatever they've done. Father, please help them not to reject you like these people in the region did and ask you to leave. Father, I ask instead that, like this man, they would come to know you.